Geared for Growth. I'm your host, Mike Mortlock from MCG Quantity Surveyors. Today, we're going in a slightly different direction and we're talking about property technology and what property investors and property investment professionals need to know about the landscape. What's the state of play at the moment? How does Australia fit in to the greater world in terms of property technology? And what is coming? And to do that, I've got no one better qualified than Peter Schravemade, who is the VP of the Proptech Association of Australia. He's the head of Reach and part of Second Century Ventures, which are basically incubators for PropTech startups in Australia. We have a chat to him about what people are actually utilising that they might not realise is technology, what's coming to the property investment industry, and things like artificial intelligence and its ability to predict property market potential over time. It's a big episode and we cover a lot of ground, but it's an amazing insight into what's happening in the space and what's coming from an industry legend. Here's Peter Schravemade. Peter Schravemade, thanks for joining me on Geared for Growth.
Thanks for having me, Mike. Great to be here.
Well, I'm excited to have you because you're a little bit of a deviation from our normal guest in all the positive ways. I could see by your face you're thinking like, geez, this could go any direction. But you wear a couple of different hats. Start us off with the first one as the VP of the PropTech Association of Australia. Now, many property investors might not necessarily know that that exists. What is the kind of idea around that? And give us a bit of a lay of the land of PropTech in Australia.
Yeah, oh look, that's an excellent question to start off with. So the PropTech Association of Australia is a group, I suppose, a network of property technology companies that come together. It's a not-for-profit association. My wingwoman, Kylie Davis, who is the president, years back decided, about 5 years back, decided that it was in the best interests of property technology companies to gather together. And there are a bunch of reasons for that. At the very basic end, to just know each other existed and have conversations around that. But we've had amazing stories come out of it where, we think that as a property technology operator, we think that the road that we're going down is unique. But what we learn through collaboration is that quite often someone has already trudged that path and run into the brick wall that you are running into. And so there's been a lot of assistance in that area. Like, here is a problem that I have at the moment. How do I deal with that? All the way through to assistance, like we have property technology companies who refer to each other and develop APIs or application programming interfaces or connections that, they're now doing business and they are serving the same customers in a way that's better for the consumer. And then we take it all the way to the national forum. We have an awards ceremony which recognizes up and coming and talented property technology CEOs and founders and their ideas and concepts. And probably the last part about that is we have a forum where we discuss things that are relevant to PropTechs, and it's a space I haven't seen around the world where we're not selling, which is a large portion of what we do, and nobody's really selling to us, which is another way of looking at it. And it's just a safe space to discuss things that are relevant and issues that are going on in the property technology landscape, and allows us as an industry, I think, to be better at what we do. And, even to the extent where we're discussing ethical and moral issues that are part of that. So I can't speak highly enough about the PropTech Association of Australia and what it does for the landscape. Having operated in 120 different countries as a property technology operator myself, I know that there are PropTech associations around the world, but none of them do really what the PropTech Association of Australia does for the community. So it's quite a special experience that it has created.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, typically we think about startups and technology coming from Silicon Valley is like the quintessential one. But then we see the New Zealanders come up with Zero and we're like, gosh, like what are they doing over there? How does Australia rate in terms of startups and technology?
Yeah, who would have thought good ideas could come from anywhere, right?
Yeah.
But, but yeah, at the moment, actually, we're getting a lot of great ideas out of New Zealand. For some time, we haven't got on to what reach is yet, but for some time, America has viewed Australian property technology in particular as being very mature. There is an underlying theory or an underlying belief that if a company can make it in Australia to a certain level, they will do very well in the States.
Is that just a
And that's because
population thing? There's just more
it's
that can be sold
it's
in a bigger population. So if it works on a smaller scale in Australia, then it'll be on steroids in the US.
well, we're a Western market to start off with,
Yep.
similar to the way Canada is, and you might say why Australia over Canada. The way our real estate system operates in Australia is inherently different to the US, and it's viewed in particular as being uh, harsher for a prop tech to grow through.
Right.
So it's almost like the analogy of you're growing grass in the desert. And if it can grow in Australia, it's considered to be, it'll probably thrive in the US if the concept can be duplicated. And one of the reasons that it's harder over here is that we are a regulated industry, whereas in the US it's self-regulated by the agents. So the company that I report to, which is the National Association of Realtors, they regulate through associations and multiple listing services in the US and Canada. But here in Australia, we're governed by the Office of Fair Trading. And to give you an example of the differences, if I mislead someone enough or misappropriate, here's a good one, misappropriate trust fund money over here
Yep.
in Australia,
That's one of the
I face a
favorites.
jail sentence. you know, I will be sent to jail. It's viewed as being particularly bad, and it's the state
Yes.
governments that will step in and go, "You've done the wrong thing," and oppose the sanctions. In the US, that would be a civil issue. So very very different, very very different ways of operating, and that's I think the reason why they view property technology as being more robust when it comes out of Australia. Our market is viewed as more mature, and particularly in property management.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting. So, let's talk about one of your other hats. Now, I picture like a shady room of American real estate oligarchs going like, how do we maintain our dominance? Is that a good way to describe the board of directors?
No, no, it's not. So the Reach program is a venture capital firm at its heart, and the venture capital came about sort of 24 years ago. There was a discussion amongst realtors or real estate agents, as we call them in Australia,
Mhm.
that we don't want to enter a period where we're not in touch with the latest property technology, or we're being ruled out because there's some kind of better form of property technology. So what the discussion was is, let's set up a venture capital fund that invests in property technology early, in order to work alongside that property technology, and basically have a foot in the door, have some kind of discussion as to where you're going and align it with industry best practice. And so the Reach program, actually, the venture capital fund was set up some time ago, 23, 24 years ago. The Reach program is only about 8, 9 years old in essence. And the one here in Australia, we're in our fifth cohort now. So we're approaching end of this year, it'll be 5 years old. But we were the first one set up outside of the US. So what my job is to run around and find new forms of property technology, invest in those forms of property technology, and then the other side of it is we accelerate it. We've found as a venture capital fund that just giving money to a property technology company won't ensure that they're going to grow. And so my role is to run an accelerator program where I work hand in hand with these property technologies, either educating, giving them content, making strategic introductions. But probably the biggest part of what we do is we align that direction with the industry. And in saying that, we also look for industry directions. At the moment, we're in a housing supply and demand shortage. So
Mhm.
we've been focused on over the past year, not wonderfully successfully, but we've been focused on finding solutions that might assist in that area. Coming back to your original question, there are no oligarchs involved. I'll leave that to the Russians. It's the National Association of Realtors. For those of you who don't know, who we're partnered with, is a large body of realtors. In fact, the biggest body that we're aware of real estate agents in the world. And the venture capital fund is called Second Century Ventures, and that's who effectively employ me.
And a body that I probably don't need to raise the ire of by describing them as shady oligarchs. But, just got to have a bit of comic relief.
No, no, they've got a sense of humor,
Oh,
Mike. It's
good.
fine.
Thank heavens. I didn't want to have a dirt nap or whatever it is happens to
No,
people.
no,
Um,
no.
so Peter, when it comes to property and property technology, there's probably a lot of things that the average investor is utilizing that they don't really realize is built by somebody. One of these we used to call unkindly propeller heads, and they've built this technology and this platform that we all kind of use today. What do we sort of take for granted at the moment, and what do you see coming that is going to change the way that, say, property investors interface with listings and agents and deals and those sorts of things?
Yeah, the areas that specific to property investment, probably the biggest area that's impacted by technology is in the area of property management, a regulated industry.
Hmm.
If you have any kind of professional manager in play, there will be multiple, like I'm going to say, between 10 and 15 forms of property technology that sit inside what they do. And that could be anything as simple as the marketing of the property that you own, all the way through to how the transaction's managed. Most people are unaware that one of the first investments from a Reach perspective was DocuSign, and a lot
Wow.
of people on the call will have
Love
used
that.
DocuSign in the last month.
Yeah.
So,
Love that.
that is a form of property technology. And maybe I should start with the definition. I will invest in anything, any kind of technology that has an impact on property. So DocuSign has now moved outside of that. It's in banks and insurance and whatever else. But the concept started in property, where we introduced them to the fact that we were a bit sick of signing a paper contract and that was a bit outdated. And yes, there are instances where that can still happen today, but for the vast majority of contracts, they're signed electronically and via e-sign. But coming back to your original question, in specific to property management, a lot of the earlier forms from coming from that industry, selling investment property investment analysis, or PIAs as they're called. A
Yep.
lot of that was done using property technology. I know you're a quantity surveyor. I'm well aware there will be very valid forms of technology in your area, and kind of has to be for the amount of accounting that is involved in your process.
Mhm.
But even back to what I'm seeing at the moment is behind the scenes, if you're buying investment property, particularly off the plan, one of the areas that's been really slow to get good technology and is kind of very individual is the handling of the sales process and
Mhm.
the way that's managed. And I would call that a channel manager. So to be specific, ABC Developments has 450 apartments to sell, and there might be 40 to 100 different sales managers. There may only be one. It's rare, but there could be loads of sales persons that have access to that stock. How does a developer manage that without disappointing the consumer? Like, how
Mhm.
do you know when you're signing a contract or that is ABC Developments, that contract hasn't already been signed for the same apartment an hour earlier in Perth?
Yes.
So channel managers are becoming particularly big. And the other type of software that I'm seeing for property investment at the moment is software that follows the investor the whole way through the process,
Mhm.
or follows, either the development of the property the whole way through. And I'll elaborate on that. This is really how I got into Proptech. I wrote a software for my then company who was selling investment property that um, it identified green and brownfield sites that could be developed.
Mhm.
It would then move to a JV or a construction process where we'd go out to tender. we would then come up with something that we were going to develop, and his Proptech again in the marketing of that, renders and whatever else.
Yep.
So we'd develop that, would tie that all nicely up in a sales bow, and that would then be handed on to a sales team, and that process would go along the lines. And then we'd pass all of the warranties from the builders, all of the any kind of installs that we'd done for fixtures and fittings and furniture, making a turnkey process. We'd pass that on to the property manager, who was then going to be responsible, whether it was ours or somebody else's, or it could go into a short-term hotel letting in the area that I was in. And I wrote a property technology software that tracked all of that, unique to the one company that worked there. And I'm seeing a lot of that. I'm seeing a lot of me's out in the industry at the moment who are writing for ABC or XYZ companies. There needs to be a bigger, better, broader solution, in my opinion, that benefits the consumer, because the feedback that we were getting from consumers prior to us writing that software is, this is great. You treat me like a transaction, though, where it's just the sale and it's go and find your own property manager.
Yep.
In the area of property investment, if you're doing it properly and you're working with someone who is experienced in that, they'll follow you the whole way through the board, and they'll get a team of players in, whether that be conveyancers or mortgage brokers or property managers or building and pest inspectors, whatever it may be, all of the tools and the arsenals in your corner. That should be driven by Proptech to ensure that the consumer experience is smooth, and I guess you're always going to have little bumps in the road, but they are handled.
Yeah, and I suppose we see that a lot done manually, right? With let's say property investment advisors, they'll say, okay, well, you've gone unconditional, so you might need to get a tax depreciation schedule from someone like us. You need to sign up to the smoke alarm testing. You need a strata report. You need your insurances. You need your property manager, and that rental review. We kind of want to be across so we can help you, and guide you, whatever. So a lot of people are sort of doing that manually, but you're kind of seeing that is the real battleground for who's going to solve that problem? Or do you think it's going to be a number of parties that might just actually API in together?
Yeah, well, in a perfect world, and coming back to the PropTech Association of Australia, and what Reach does is we try and group those players together so that they are talking to one another, that they understand. I think sometimes in a PropTech's mind, they focus too much on their product and let's make it the latest and greatest, and we can add this bell and whistle, where the consumer is really just wanting a smooth transaction. They're not looking at the overall goal of going, I want to buy this development, and then I want potential options that are along the way. But I'd love it to be seamless, where the contract, if I decide, can go straight away over to Mike Mortlock so he can do a depreciation survey on it, which is going to benefit me at tax time. So in an ideal scenario, there'd be more of a marketplace where, a property investor could go and select stock, and that would be assisted by a property investment advisor. And then on deciding that stock, they might have a discussion around a potential conveyancer if they don't have one already, and maybe a mortgage broker that's there. And then, from that period, we're going through the transaction, we're managing the transaction. Towards the end of the transaction, it might go off to a depreciation survey, or that may happen at tax time, either way. But we're looking at property management scenarios before the property settles. It might have a 2-year settlement period. 3 months before settlement's triggered, we're already in the era of a property manager of either short-term rental or long-term, and we're making that a seamless transaction. And that property manager is given then not only the construction details and all the warranties, and they're made aware of what the development actually is, so that they can go and sell it. Any marketing paraphernalia, believe it or not, there's no handover. So, when you buy a investment property and you're given all of this glamorous marketing, there's no real one solution to then pass that on to a property manager, whose then job is to go and market that property. So, just little things like that along the way would make it a smooth and transaction. They'd make the transaction a lot less bumpy for property investors than what it is. And I don't see it as one solution. Coming back to your question, I think there are multiple softwares involved, but the more that they talk together and the more the industry develops, the better the solution becomes for the consumer. And that's really what I'm interested in.
Yeah, and I guess that's what we want. We just kind of want things to be easier. We want, like, we gravitate towards seamless. You could say we're lazy, or we just value efficiency. There's maybe two ways to look at it. I want to ask you a question that I'm sure that you're sick of, and I apologize in advance, but I have to talk about AI.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
we've seen some data recently that productivity in Australia is at pre-COVID levels. We've got a 26-year height of wage price growth, but productivity is in the doldrums. Now, I made a bold prediction when ChatGPT came out, was that this is going to change those productivity metrics. Probably because I heard other people say this will actually probably 10x the Industrial Revolution, which is the greatest sort of technological leap forward. Now, nothing's happened yet. Or nothing that I can see, nothing that the productivity measures can see. Do you believe AI will change the world in that kind of level of context, like bigger than the Industrial Revolution? The Geared for Growth Property Investing podcast is presented by our business, MCG Quantity Surveyors. If you're an investor or a property professional looking to get the best tax depreciation deductions for yourself or your clients, please get in touch with us at mcgqs.com.au. It's our mission to help as many property investors as we can to maximise their claims and maximise their property education as well.
Yeah, it has the potential to. It's certainly, some of the ways it's providing. Well, let me start at the beginning. Number one, I'm not sick of talking about it. I think the industry in general is a bit fatigued with it. So
Yeah.
I'll put that out front. I love talking technology, so I'm fine with it. Number two, let's separate AI from the newer forms, the generative AI that comes through, because just talking about AI itself as a term, it won't change the world. But some of the newer forms that are coming through in generative AI, I think, has opened our mind, and we don't have enough imagination to understand the possibilities of what it could actually do. Now, coming back to productivity, yeah, I don't think your average Joe Blow or Mary Jane, whoever it may be, has within a year, we're talking a year, has actually gotten on top of how to use AI or generative AI, the newer forms of AI, in the way that's best. I think there are a small percentage of top users that are actually harnessing that, and they're doing very well. And we're seeing that in specific areas, like productivity in software development is off the charts. Most big companies are saying that it's 30% better, because rather than searching for code, you can now go and ask what would be the solution to this kind of problem, and it'll bring that up. So there are definite areas where we're seeing productivity come through. Now, in the property investment space, and in real estate sales in general, I would argue that it has been largely negligible at this stage. I will go as far to say that in the hands of the right user, it is a weapon, and a really good weapon, and I've seen examples of that. So I see people who are understanding the technology and utilizing it, have put it into areas where they will utilize it as operating better in their market. But I think it'll be some time before we actually see, like, we still haven't quite. We now know it's there, and it was this big light bulb moment going, oh my gosh, this is amazing. But if you look at what's actually come out of it, no, it hasn't really across the board nudged our productivity up. But I think we're only on the cusp of just imagining what can be done. There are so many, even in the area of valuations of land, for example, all we're missing is the instant data of sales, and these algorithms should be able to predict very, very keenly what a property's value is worth, 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, 2 years, 3 years down the track, and probably factor in, extenuating circumstances like cyclones or natural disasters like floods, and show you outcomes for that. And in the area of property investment, That's kind of like the holy grail, but we're right on the cusp. That technology should exist, and to an extent it already does. There's a company called C3.ai over in Denver, and that company says it can predict property values up to 5 years within 97% accuracy. Because over in Denver they have access to the data almost immediately upon sale, which is a very, very rare thing to sort of get. That's the next level. But assuming that we can unlock that in an auction-based society, which is where we are,
Yeah.
Australia is kind of on the cutting edge of a lot of these technologies actually coming out and providing productive outcomes. So, I'm with you. I would agree. I don't know if that's your statement or you're just being theoretical. I don't see a great productivity shift at the moment, but we're only 1 year in. Like,
Yeah. Most people have just gone to DALL-E or something and go, draw me a fish with hands, and you're like, oh yeah, this is cool. But that
yep,
is that is
yep,
not
yep.
that is not the height of the mountain of large
No,
language models
no,
or generative AI, right?
no. We've used it to turn us into Beyonce or put a unicorn thing on our head. I don't know, but there are some really, really cool examples that I've seen out there, and some of them in property investment where they're actually using the generative AI to scrape relevant information. I've seen lots of short-term rental generative AI approaches in the US where they are bringing up short-term rental data um, that is relevant and matching it with long-term rental data to give investors more informed opinions, and that's cool. There's a lot of cool stuff coming.
Mm.
Find the ones that are relevant to you and make your life more productive as a result of it. And also, my advice to anyone listening is to spend some time understanding what it can actually do and how that can benefit your life. Like if you're looking at just using it for the sake of using it, don't bother.
Mm.
It has to give you a positive outcome either in efficiency, time management, or doing something that you're already executing faster or better than what you're currently doing.
It's been doing a great job of analyzing massive CSV files for me, and I can just say this column means this. Any outliers? Like you talk to it like a human. You're like, anything weird, or like I think these things are interesting, but like, is there anything that sort of doesn't fit within expectations? And it's amazing being it is like having your own data scientist in your pocket, and that's just the one application that I've found a use for it. It's quite amazing stuff, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really good example to my point before. You found a way to use it to assist you that in a way it's going to be productive. Um, I think most of the world has not done that yet. So, I think that's why we're kind of going, was this a flash in the pan? But believe you me, like before blockchain even hit the airwaves, and it had been around for a while. I was aware of OpenAI back in 2016. Um, it just hadn't sort of been open to the public yet, so people were aware of what it was doing. But um, I famously remember I was invited to speak on blockchain. Remember that cryptocurrency?
Yeah, yeah, I do.
Um,
Yeah.
what was the other one? There were a couple of others, and these were all the rage before OpenAI hit them. it
Yeah, or
hit the front of the post.
NFTs, that was the same
Yep.
sort of.
Yeah, and all of a sudden, every single social media influencer and coach became a generative AI expert. It was like overnight. They just
Mm.
snapped their fingers, and all of a sudden, that's what they're doing.
You can buy prompts, just things to
Yeah.
feed into AI to ask them better questions. I mean, that's a whole
Yes.
cottage industry in itself. Um,
Yes, you can.
I want to go back to the holy grail of AI and property investment. You talked about something that was a big question I wanted to ask you about, but um, before we do that, I want to talk about what I saw happening with things like OpenAI and ChatGPT is that it democratized AI to people that weren't coders like yourself. It meant that people like myself can go and suddenly have some power at my fingertips if I could just figure out the right applications, the right ways to use it. Has that kind of fed into prop tech? Like, because typically I would assume you need coders. These are the people that create these things. And they might have, a genius locked in a cupboard and a sales guy that talks to people, but it's the genius that you need to actually build the thing. But has the democratization of AI enabled Proptech to come from unlikely places?
Yeah, absolutely. Every day of the week. Let's start. We're seeing more prop tech by about 30% than we were 2 years ago.
Oh,
So
wow.
there are more versions of prop tech. And I put that down to the fact that coding has become easier. Pulling something out of the ground is much easier at the moment. Ask me again as to whether the volume means that those ideas are sound or better or innovative. Probably not. We're carrying a stat here at Reach where we track about 500 property technology companies across the Australian space, and 280 of them announced an artificial intelligence chatbot last year.
Right.
Out of the blue, go figure. Is that innovative or new? No, no. They've plugged into most of them. The large majority, the vast majority, have plugged into OpenAI, and they've set that on that data set, and they've made that specific to them. So they've made that
Yep.
respond. So is that new? No. But in contrast to that, I spoke to I'd be rough calling him an industry dinosaur, but let's just paint a picture
Stalwart.
of yeah, a 70-year-old industry legend
Yep.
who has consistently stated that he has no interest in property technology, told me only yesterday that he is now coding. And the reason he's doing that is OpenAI has opened that up. Now, I would have said even with OpenAI coming in, that was not going to be a possibility. But one of the things that I'm coming to understand is that we're entering and this is not specific to prop tech or property investment, we're entering an age where it is now over to you to find the answers to the question that you need.
Yep.
We're probably going to stray away from textbooks because they won't move fast enough for what we do in schools. The person who is able to find and problem solve their own, whatever the issue is or the end destination that they need to get to, they're going to be better in any kind of market. It doesn't really matter what it is. We have so much information now available to us, and that's not just in the area of coding. That's in the area of what, data is in my suburb and how do I best leverage that. The person who's able to use the tools that, to find the response or to find the successful answer that they need to their question, they're going to do better than anyone who cannot. And so, that's why my encouragement is to use OpenAI and find how you can best leverage that to meet the end destination that you want to be at. No, it doesn't matter what that is. In the medical profession, they're even using it to diagnose, cases, and there are rumors that they're able to do that faster than your average GP and better. So, this is infiltrating everything. It won't just be property technology, and that's not a scary assessment. That's more, hey, you should be trying to figure out, like in your instance, you're using it to sit over the top of spreadsheets and find not only that it goes through great swathes of data, but it'll isolate anomalies and things of interest to you. So my recommendation would be the days of having a Britannica on the wall are long gone. They were gone 20 years ago. But even using Google to find out something, most people are going to speak to something and say, what is the answer to this and what is the response? And it'll give us much more precise information than what we used to in the past.
Yeah, I love it. I learned just recently that it was science or scientific knowledge that fingerprints didn't have a commonality between them. Like when you use your fingerprint to scan something, they've actually worked out that whilst they are different, like a human being will have commonality from their index finger to their pinky finger, right? Which means that you can potentially in the future scan into your laptop faster, but even more importantly, solve crimes where maybe you only had one finger on record, but they used a different finger or was left at the crime scene. And these are some of the bizarre things that you just hear from AI giving to
Yeah.
humanity rather than taking over in a Terminator style way, which was probably dominating the discussion for the first little while, right?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I would agree with that. You know, are we
Let's.
all going to lose? Are we all going to lose our jobs to AI? You know, that
Mm.
was that. Yeah, I can't see that being the case.
Mm. Well, that's good. That's a nice comfort. I want to finish on this holy grail, and the holy grail for me is what you touched on, is certainly for property investors. The idea that, let's say you and I are looking for an investment property, we have a set budget, we want a particular yield, and then we want the highest growing property from a capital growth point of view in the next 15 years. It seems plausible that we should have enough data in the history of Australia to be able to feed machines to create these correlations, to be able to predict within a certain degree of accuracy that, Peter and Mike, these are the top 5 properties that meet that criteria. And then suddenly the world becomes about, well, we're actually competing on this tiny little group of properties because the data is saying, well, that's where the value is. And it hasn't happened yet, and I think you elucidated one of the reasons why, and that's the data lag. But are there any other fundamental reasons why we can't expect to see something like that in the future?
No, no, there isn't. No, you know, and I'd put a time frame on it. I think within 5 years we'll be looking at way more visibility of instantaneous data than what we have at the moment. At the moment, we have a 6 week lag, and that's generally for um, sales prices to hit the Office of State Revenue or
Yep.
the Department of Energy Resource or wherever it is, titles office,
Yep.
and then at that stage they made public. And the bizarre thing is the way they made public is generally data scraping at the moment by some of our big ones, like CoreLogic, PropTrack is another, and there are quite a few data providers out there who are all fighting over the same pool of data, but they're still laggy. There's still a delay that makes their information pretty hard to predict. Where you should be going. So a lot of investors are relying on longer term forecasts of, hey, here is what the market has done, and traditionally here's what it's done in the past. And you don't get them in. You're right. You don't get them in one area. Even trying to understand the current rents that we're getting is very, very difficult. But we've seen some disquiet, if I want to call it that, go down in the property industry recently around this exact thing where the ACCC stepped in. And I mean, we're not calling it a block, but they certainly asked a lot of questions of realestate.com.au and why they should buy out a major provider, and whether that would monopolize an industry. And I'm not here today to make an assessment on that sale, but there are a bunch of things that have sort of come out of that. We have industry providers who should know when a property is listed, what it's listed for; when a property is rented, what it's been rented for; when a property is sold, what it's sold for. We should have that data readily available to us, and it would be a benefit to the consumer to do it. As far as I understand, the major stumbling block in the way at the moment is privacy laws.
Right.
That protect people up until a point that they hit the titles office, and the titles office make that public. So, and that's only in the area of sales. That's not really in the area of rentals. So we have all of these data points, and that'd be amazing. And we even have short-term rental scrapers that will go through, and they will figure out what short-term rentals are renting for in particular areas. But for a property investor, the difficulty is trying to house all of that in as a mum and dad investor, which most of us are, by the way,
Yeah.
trying to figure that all out in one. And I guess that leads me back to your selection process. And this is probably where we ended up last time we spoke, Mike. The
Yep.
selection process is to finding what a good property investment salesperson does for you is not only assessing your capacity and not overstretching you in that and having a plan, but they're probably using multiple data points to provide the best advice for you as to why you should be purchasing this property at this particular moment, and giving you the information on, here are the sales figures, here's the long-term rentals, here's the short-term rentals. This is why I think this is going to match your particular, preference for buying a property at this point in time, given your financial capacity. So, in the selection process of actually deciding who you're working with on in funding these properties for you to match the needs that you have, I think you should be looking at the technology that sit behind these people and their ability to leverage that to find you the best result.
Yeah, it sounds like people are always going to be in the mix, but these are augmented people with that data, right? So it's not taking the jobs; it's just making us all more effective at them.
Yeah, absolutely. And those searches, they take time, and it takes time to collate it. But I know good property investment salespersons who do that for each and every purchase our client does in order to give them the best possible. And the market does what the market does. That may still end up that it doesn't do what you want it to, but having a plan at the start and going, here is why we've chosen that property for you, and here is the direction that we think it should go. That's ultra important. I'd rather make a decision based on good, sound research than on my gut instinct that says that, hey, it's a good time to buy in California because I've got a feeling in my loins about it at the time. So,
Yeah,
I'd rather be based on good research than just a gut instinct.
absolutely. Peter, I think you have told us all that the future is bright, and we look forward to seeing what bubbles out of your cauldron for your 2025 intake and beyond. Thank you very much for joining me on the show.
Thank you for having me, Mike. That's the best witch analogy anyone's ever suggested. I will take that and I will run with it. It's been a pleasure, mate. Take it easy.
Yeah, cheers. Appreciate it.